Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about methods within Java. So let's create a class and let's name it methods. And again, let's delete this unnecessary code and let's do public static void main and then parentheses string and then args and then curly brackets and then in the space below we'll be programming. And now let's start with what methods are. So another word for methods is, I was about to say it previously, but functions. So functions are used to define protocols and actions within programming, and they help make code easier to read, less redundant, and more accessible. So syntax for a method within Java is as follows. So first we have the access modifier. I'll talk about what that means in a future video. But first we have the access modifier, then we have the return type, then we have the name of the function, and you can come up with whatever you want. And here we have the parameters. And then you have curly brackets, and your code goes on in between these curly brackets. So we'll talk about the access modifier in a separate video. So for right now, we'll just leave it as public. So the first thing that we're going to start with is the return type. So in the previous videos, we talked about the different types of variables. We said that there are integers, there are strings, there are booleans, and there are doubles. So a return type is going to be what type of variable the method or function will return. And it's going to be either one of these four, or it's going to be something separate called void. And if it's void, that means there is no return. So there is no return if the return type is void. So next, there's the name of the function, and you can name it whatever you want, but more ideally, if you're naming a function something, it should be something that's easy to read for the programmer and something that makes sense. So if you're trying to make a function that tells you how many people are in your classroom, you should say the name should probably be number in or students in classroom, not something random like hello. And then lastly, we're going to analyze the parameters part. And that's basically and parameters are also sometimes called arguments, but that's what goes inside of a function. So if you're trying to give input into a function or method, that's where it would go, the parameters. And they have the parameters themselves have their own data types. So they're either integers, strings, booleans, doubles, or any other form of object. So one thing that's pretty important to realize is that when a parameter is called, it's not able to be accessed anywhere beyond the scope of these brackets. So if you had another function, let's say you had two functions, you couldn't access the parameters from the first method onto the second. It's just restricted to these highlighted lines. So that's why it's important that you don't mess up your parameter names as well. So let's come up with an example of a method. So we're going to make the access modifier public, and then we'll make our return type as a double because we want to include decimals. And then the purpose of our method will be a calculator. So let's call it calculator. And then the parameters, first we're going to have a string, which it's going to tell us like what operation we're doing. So let's call it operation. And this will either be plus, minus, divide, or multiply. Then we're going to have two numbers. So double number one and double number two. And then we have our curly brackets. And then within. So what this red line is telling us is that it's missing a return statement. And every function, if it's not void, it has to have a return. So we're going to return something that's a double value later. So just ignore this red squiggly line. But anyways, let's create a variable that's local within and only accessible within these lines of code. And let's call that double return value. And let's initialize it to 0.0. So if the operation and dot equals, because remember in the last video we are talking about if you want to see if two strings are similar or the same, you have to do equals or compare to and then set it equal to 0. So I'll actually do it both ways for you guys, but so if it equals this sign, which is a sign for minus, then you have to do number 1 minus number 2. And we can actually set the return value here. So wherever the program, whenever it's coming, it reads from top to bottom, but wherever it comes across a return, it'll return that value and then it'll stop the whole program itself. The whole method will stop. But there always has to be a return value which is accessible at all times. So in this case, this return value is only accessible if the operation equals this, and that's not sufficient enough for the whole program. So if operation equals this minus sign, you're going to subtract the two numbers. Else if operation equals the multiply sign equals asterisk, which we use in Java, then we're going to return number 1 times number 2. And then let's just copy and paste this really quickly. If it is the addition sign equals addition sign, then number 1 plus number 2, and then subtraction, or we already did subtraction, so division, number 1 divided by number 2. And then let's say the operation is not either any of those. Like it's not addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. Let's just return 0, 0.0 so that the user know that there's an error. And that should be sufficient. So one weird thing with BlueJ is the way that it actually runs, it actually considers tester classes. So let's just rename this method as methods tester, and let's copy and paste this program here, or this function. And now and if we go back to BlueJ, you can see that the name automatically changed. And now let's call this methods. And we're going to be selective with what we delete. So we're going to delete this first part here, and we're going to keep public class methods. We can delete this. We have to keep this because it's considered the constructor and it's necessary. We'll explain that in a future video. And then we can delete these comments and replace this function with what we had before. So now let's compile it and let's go back to methods tester. And now let's create an object or an instance of our previous class. We'll explain more what that means in our next videos, but we'll just say methods because that's the name of our other class. And then we'll call this working. Let's just call it working so we can see. And then equals new methods. And then, yeah. So now, because working is an instance or object of methods, working will have the method of calculator. So if we see working dot calculator, that will work. And now we have to have 3 parameters. One, a string, a double, and a double. And that's what error it's giving us right now. So let's make our string like our operation subtraction, and let's do 5 and 4. And we have two options. We could either system.out.println all of this. Let's do that option first. Out.println all of this. Or we could set this as a variable, and the variable type would be double because this function returns a double. So double result 1, let's call it. Double result 1 is equal to working on calculator. And then we can print out, result 1. And it should give us 1 2 times in the compiler. So let's go back to the compiler and let's run it. And as you can see, we get 1 2 times. So I personally prefer the first method, the second method, because it's a lot cleaner to see. So let's call double result 2 as working dot calculator And then let's say we want to multiply those two. Let's just use 5 and 4, and instead we'll use multiplication. And then we'll just copy this and then this and change the variable names, and then do this as plus and this as divide, and then we'll print out system dot out.ln println result 1, 2, 3, 4. Now for the first one, we get 1.0. For the second one, we should get 20. For the third one, we should get 9. And for the fourth one, it might be 1.25 or it might be 1 based on how the calculator. Actually, it should be 1.25 because the parameters are both doubles. If we kept them as integers and then change them to doubles later, then there might be an issue, but they're both going to be sent in as doubles, so they'll be treated like doubles. And as we know, doubles can have decimals, so we'll get 1.25. And then as a edge case or test case, let's have one without a known operator. So let's just say random number here or random operator here, and it should give us 0.0 because that's what our else case is. So that's system.out.println result 5, and that we should get that in that order, those outputs in that order. So let's run the class, and that's exactly what we get. So I have one more example for you guys, or it's going to be more question based. So I'll give you guys a method, and then I'll give you guys questions and try your best to answer them correctly, and then I'll give you the correct answers. But before I do that, I would like to go over this method again. So the return type is a double, the name of the function is calculator, and the parameter is one string parameter called operation, the one double parameter named number one, and and another double parameter named number two. And let's say I wanted to access number one out here, and we just tried system.out.println number one out here, you can see that this will have an error because number one is not found because it's not found within these curly brackets. But if we put it here, then it would be able to see it because it's in the range. And actually, let's put it at the front so that it can actually reach that statement. And yeah, now as you can see, it works. But you have to make sure that the parameters are only found within the brackets scope. Okay, so here's the example that I want to give you. It gives us the function here, and you could pause the video and read it. And I have these four questions for you at the top. So I encourage you to pause the video, and I'll give you the answers in a second. So what is the name of the function? The name of the function could be found right here, and it's grade received. So let's write grade received. Grade received. So what are the parameter names? And as we can see, it's here. The parameter's name is grade, and it's a type. It's a double, so it's a double type. So what value is being returned by the function? A string is being returned by the function. Question number 4, why does it have to return a string? Well, that's because that's what the method is named as. However, if this was void, then the answer would be none. And again, the answer would be because it is a void. Because it is a void, it cannot have any return values. In conclusion, functions are used to define protocols and actions within programming, and they make code easier to read, less redundant, and more accessible. So I hope you learned something new today, and thank you for watching.